Hello, Lisa Best here with The Heart-Centered Habit, author of The Heart-Centered Habit, Perceiving Through the Heart of the Matter. And today I feel inspired to share with you just a little bit more about my story and where the Heart-Centered Habit book came from, and it did come from my direct experiences. When I was 23 years old, I felt this kind of calling within me. It was like this calling of, I know there's something more. There's something more that I'm supposed to be doing with my life, more than what I was doing at the time. And at the time, I was in college, and I was finishing up my last year of college, and I was working as a personal trainer out of the gym at Florida State University. And I just knew that there was something more, and so I ended up just kind of jumping, and I moved to Ohio from Florida, and I was in search of what is this inner nudge that keeps calling me my whole life. And so I went and searched for it, and I thought that maybe going back to Ohio, where my roots were, where my traditional roots were, my parents were born there, and we moved after my parents had me. I was 5 years old when we moved to Florida. So I was going back to Ohio thinking that I would discover this higher calling that I felt nudging at me. And years later, I realized that I started to study about the hero's journey. And it felt so similar to the journey that I was on. The hero's journey was created, I guess you could say, from a mythologist who's no longer around, but his name was Joseph Campbell. And the hero's journey signifies these events that occur in a hero's life, that these, you could say, milestones that happen, events that occur, and obstacles that people who become heroes and leaders have to go through. And Joseph Campbell had many examples of this, like Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, and that really resonated with me a lot because even though he didn't give any examples of women, I still could relate to it. And in looking at Luke Skywalker and how, if you've ever seen Star Wars, which I grew up in the 80s, so I grew up with Star Wars, but how he was being raised by his aunt and uncle, and his uncle repaired droids. And you could tell that Luke Skywalker was not fulfilled in doing that. But he had a story that was given to him of who he was. And he believed in that story, even though it did not bring him fulfillment. And once the two droids came that they had, bought, which was R2-D2 and 3CPO, something started to awaken within him when he saw the projection that R2-D2 was, putting out on, it was a projection of Princess Leia asking for help. And something awoke within him. You could tell he got that calling, right? And so on the hero's journey, you see Luke Skywalker leaving the familiar, leaving the story that the world had given him, that his family had given him, and he goes and he steps into the unfamiliar, and he steps into the unknown, and he goes out searching to discover this higher calling that he feels within him. And so, of course, he finds his teacher, Yoda, and his teacher teaches him about the Force. And then Luke Skywalker goes through many battles, and it's really, his battles have to do with not giving in to the dark side, right? Not giving in to anger and hatred and things like that, and believing in them and buying into them as the truth of who he is. Not viewing reality through fear, not viewing reality through worry, not viewing reality through doubt, not viewing reality just through those particular thought forms or those particular feelings. And so his final battle, he faces Darth Vader, the darkest being, right? The darkest force in the universe at that time. and it happens to be his father. And you see how he overcomes evil not by physical force, but by love, right? He is able to see into the darkness, the goodness that's there. Into the center of the darkness is goodness. In the center of fear is goodness. In the center of anger is goodness. In the center of hatred is goodness. And he was so connected to the force, which you could say is our heart-centered innate power, our heart-centered true authentic nature. He was so aligned with the force and could sense the oneness, that which was the force, because the force was the unified field, right, that connected the entire universe. He could feel that power, and he knew that it was still alive in Darth Vader, that it was still within him. And that's how he overcame evil. And so each one of us is actually being called to a higher calling. Every human on this planet is being called to that higher calling of overcoming evil, not by buying into it anymore or struggling with it, or fighting against it, or denying it and escaping it, but instead by looking it straight in the eye, getting into the center of it, allowing yourself to experience pain, allowing yourself to experience fear, allowing yourself to experience hatred, allowing yourself to experience these things, only to get into the center of them where they are all pure goodness, which is the force, which is the innate power that you're being called to become connected to throughout all of existence. And when you connect to it within yourself and you perceive all of reality through the force or through your infinite nature, you can perceive that these dark forces and this darkness is actually pure goodness. It's disguised only because they have been defined that way. And so as I went on my journey of the hero's journey, I began to realize that there were two stories that were occurring within me, you could say. One story was in my head, and this was a very small story. It was a very limited story that I really believed to be me. It was a story that the world had given me. It was a story that society had given me. It was a story of all the should and shouldn'ts that I am as a woman. It was all of the times in my past that I identified with circumstances and said, this is who I am. It's all the times I identified in the past with thought forms and emotions and said, this is who I am. And it was a very, very limited story that was divided in two. It had a good, it had a bad, it had a right, it had a wrong. And through this limited story, I felt like the world was on my shoulders. When I perceived reality through this limited story of me in my head, I felt enslaved to the world. I felt unfulfilled. I felt just lack and limitation, and I suffered greatly. And so the hero's journey for me was journeying into myself and answering the call, that higher calling, which is this bigger story that was within my heart. And this bigger story that's within my heart says you are more than what you think. You are more than who you think you are. You are more than your circumstances. You are more than the should and shouldn'ts of society. You are more than your roles. You are more than even just a woman. You are so much more. You are so vast and so infinite, and you have infinite potential. And the story, this vast story of me, I was able to sink into through the heart-centered habit. So when I was the head-centered me, it was like I was lost in this limited story. And I felt like I had to go from here to my heart, from my head to my heart. I had to go through pain. And this pain that was always within me was really just past judgments of where I had been perceived as bad and wrong, and I identified with it. Past experiences that I identified with as being bad or wrong. And any time in my past that I identified with any wrong or any bad or any misperception of me, it caused this kind of residue of pain that I carried with me. And so as my head became honest about this pain, which felt like suffering, it felt like lack, it felt like limitation, as I became truly honest about it and I began to embrace it, it became those were my battles. Because there was the calling. I refused the calling for a little while, then I finally answered the call. And then I had to go through a battle, and then a battle, and then a battle, and then a battle. And then there's that final battle. And the final battle, well, first, when you're going through the battles, when I was going through and embracing my pain, I would be honest about how I felt underneath. I wasn't, because I realized that I had been kind of conditioned not to be raw honest, like radically honest about how I felt. Because as a girl and as a woman, I was taught, if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say it at all. If, you're feeling a certain way, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, so don't, if it's not something positive, you don't express it. And so instead of expressing it with other people, I began to express it within my own heart. And my head began to become honest about this pain that I felt within. And then I acknowledged that this pain wasn't caused by what I thought. I used to have blame, like usually I blame myself, or I would blame a circumstance or a situation, because this pain in the present moment would constantly get triggered. And I thought that person over there was harming me and was making me feel like a victim. But actually, indirectly, they were being a teacher to show me that there was pain underneath, that there was this residue of where I had identified with a limited story, and it was causing me a lot of pain, and it was time to resolve it by becoming heart-centered. And so I became honest with it, and I acknowledged that there's no one to blame for this pain that I feel. That it's just ready to be acknowledged. And then I allowed it to have a voice. I allowed it to express itself, to say whatever it is that it needed to say. And then I asked my heart to help me receive that pain as life and receive it as a gift. And then I just breathed the pain in that moment, and I breathed it in as life. And I just imagined that pain spreading through my entire body. And all of a sudden, the pain that felt so like a rock seemed to dissipate into a fluid and then into a gas and just disappeared. And then I began to just love myself, and love that part of myself. Love the pain, love whatever it was that I was feeling that was very uncomfortable or unwanted or inconvenient. And then I began to thank it. I was grateful that it was in my experience so that I could return to the bigger story of me, so that I could remember the bigger story of me. And so pain, uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable feelings within us, unwanted experiences and unwanted feelings within us are actually doorways into the remembrance of that bigger story of ourselves. And so my final battle was being able to perceive everything outside of myself and everything that was occurring within myself as the divine light, the light I am. Of seeing the goodness in the midst of the storms, of seeing the goodness in the midst of the negative emotions, of seeing the goodness in the midst of judgment, seeing the goodness in the midst of rejection, of perceiving the life that's within and at the core of all of existence. And so, what an exciting time that we have right now, because I'm starting to see how I think it was the Dalai Lama that said that when he was talking about enlightenment and I think salvation, and he said that the Western woman would be the one to, enlighten the world. And I've really sensed into that. And I feel that when I look at like movies, like the latest Star Wars that came out, the hero was a woman. and the Hunger Games. The hero is a woman. And in history, even when Joseph Campbell talked about the hero's journey, he didn't give any examples of women. And when I studied, spiritual teachers and great heroes and philosophers and scientists and quantum physicists, most of them were men throughout history. And there's kind of been this stigma for women. There has been a lot of equality between men and women in the workplace. Women can go out and make a living, a great, successful living, just as much as a man can. But what I feel like the Dalai Lama was saying is that when women go on that hero's journey, and we sink into and fully remember and fully awaken into the bigger story of what we truly are as a species, as the human race, because we as women are taught at such a young age to connect our energy with people. I mean, we're so empathic. Like, we can go into a room and we can feel all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the judgments of everybody in that room without them even speaking. My husband, it was so funny because we would go to, gatherings and things with other friends and stuff, and I could feel everything that was going on below the surface, and he just thought I was crazy. Like, I don't get it. Like, he was just only aware of his thoughts. He wasn't aware of anybody else's thoughts or feelings. And so how amazing when, and a lot of my friends that are women have the same experience. They're very empathic and sensitive, and they can sense into, because we're the women are the ones in our families that usually hold the family together, like in an energetic way. We are the ones that connect to people and really empathize with them. But when we connect to them, we're connecting to them in such a deep way that we almost like take on, all their feelings and all their emotions and all their beliefs and all their judgments. Where men weren't taught to do that as much, and there are men who are very empathic, so I'm not saying that it can't happen for a man, because of course I know many men that are very empathic, where they can go into a room and they can sense everybody's thoughts and judgments and beliefs and feelings and all that. But as a culture, there has been this kind of difference between a man and a woman. And so when women, or you could even say the femininity, starts to awaken, whether it's in women or in men, and we remember the bigger story of what and who we are, it's like we're going to awaken. It's like the tipping point where all the people that we have been connected to, that we have tuned in with, they will be elevated. When we become the light, they will become the light, because it's like almost as if our DNA is like intertwined, because we have connected with so many people as women so deeply. And so the healing doesn't just happen within us, where we go from a limited to an unlimited, from a suffering to a fulfilled, free state. And we really start to embody the infinite nature that we are, and we really start to embody the pure love that we are, and we really embody the infinite intelligence that we are, and we begin to express that. We're paving the way for all the people that we have connected with throughout our lifetime and throughout history even. And we're really elevating the whole so quickly, so much more quickly than individuals who weren't empathic and didn't kind of tie up their energy fields and sense deeply into other people's experiences like we have. And so I just see it as such a beautiful time for women and the feminine to awaken and to really return, not to the I need to go out there and compete and become a feminist and, fight the man and, compete against the man. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about a spiritual awakening, and in utilizing our femininity and utilizing our empathic abilities and spreading that infinite awareness into all of our relationships very quickly. So my question for you today is are you ready to answer the call? Answer the higher calling that you feel in your heart. And there's absolutely nothing wrong of being a woman that's a stay-at-home mom, that supports and serves. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's basically how I have been. And I've supported my husband, and I feel that my husband is kind of looking at me almost as if he's like, I was born to wait for you to step into your light so that I could step into mine. Like, I feel like the men in our lives are actually gentle giants. Like, they're such gentle men, and they really do. They were born during this time, the men in our generation, and the men, they are really pulling for the woman to step into their light. They're really kind of waiting. Like, my husband, he's just waiting for me to step into my light, and then he will, because if he stepped into his light first, then me being so empathic, I would have just followed suit like that, But this gives me a choice. I have a choice to step into my light first. And I feel so honored and so grateful that my husband is giving me that choice. And so that I can really realize the infinite power that I actually am. And so the Heart-Centered Habit can help you. It is just one way out of infinite practices and ways that can help you answer the call and really, overcome those battles of pain and suffering and darkness in your life, and sink back into the truth of what you really are, which is this big story. It's vast. It's an infinite story. And you have the power from that perception to choose your experience. You get to choose the quality of your experience when you're able to perceive from the infinite story of who you truly are. You no longer have to buy into somebody judging you as bad, and you no longer have to buy into that judgment of bad. You no longer have to buy into your circumstances that look lack and limited. You don't have to buy into that anymore. You get to choose always life. You get to choose abundance. You get to choose goodness. You get to choose love. And so that's really the true spiritual power that I feel that the feminine is being called into, is to choose love. And when we choose love, and when we truly step out of the small story in our heads and into the big story that we are, that the whole world is going to awaken so fast to the love that they are too. So I hope that in some way this video helped you, and I hope that it inspires you to answer the call of your own heart, the call of the heart-centered you that is just waiting for you to return home. It's waiting for your head to return home to its pure, authentic voice of just pure, unconditional love, so that you can be the hero in your life. Thank you.